Out here in west-central Minnesota, the land is supposed to be flat. 90 miles west of Minneapolis, the corn rows run straight to the horizon, and then, without warning, the ground begins to heave. Hills rise, lakes fill every hollow, and a green ridge lifts above the farms. This is Sibley State Park, and hiding in these hills is a summit called Mount Tom, one of the highest points for 50 miles in any direction. Today we drive into the park, climb to the top, and walk the shore of Lake Andrew. And the story of why these hills exist at all begins with a wall of ice. Let us get our bearings. We are in Kandiyohi County, Minnesota, about 15 miles north of Willmar and roughly 100 miles west of the Twin Cities. The park sits just outside the little town of New London, above the shore of Lake Andrew. Sibley State Park covers more than 2,500 acres of hills, oak woods, wetlands, and lakeshore. On the map, it sits right where Minnesota's western prairie meets rolling, lake-filled hill country. That meeting line is exactly what makes this place worth the trip. The park road winds in past sloughs and small ponds, and already the terrain is doing something unusual. Every dip in the land holds water. Every rise is a smooth, rounded hill, with no bare rock ledges anywhere. Geologists have a name for country like this. It is called knob and kettle terrain, and it was not carved by rivers or lifted by earthquakes. It was dumped here, load by a glacier. During the last ice age, sheets of ice spread down over almost all of Minnesota. Lobes of that ice, thousands of feet thick in places, flowed south like slow rivers, grinding up bedrock and carrying the rubble along. When the climate warmed around 12,000 years ago, the ice began to melt back. Everything it carried, boulders, gravel, sand, and clay, dropped out of the melting ice right where it stood. Along the edge of one great lobe, that debris piled into a belt of high, jumbled hills. That belt of hills is called the Alexandria Moraine, and Sibley State Park sits right on top of it. The moraine runs for well over 100 miles across west-central Minnesota, a band of glacial hill country standing above the flat farmland on either side. Buried blocks of ice, left behind in the rubble, slowly melted and let the ground sag into deep hollows. Those hollows filled with water, and today Kandiyohi County alone holds close to 70 named lakes. Mount Tom is simply one of the tallest piles of glacial debris on the whole moraine, and we are about to walk up it. We park near the trailhead and set out on foot. The Mount Tom Trail is a loop of nearly 4 miles, climbing through oak woods and open meadows on its way to the summit. It gains close to 400 feet of elevation along the way, which is honest work by the standards of this part of Minnesota. The path starts gently, rolling between hills that were nameless heaps of gravel 12,000 years ago. Now they are covered in grass and oaks, and alive with birdsong in late April. The county we are walking through carries a lovely name. Kandiyohi comes from the Dakota language, and it means where the buffalo fish come, for the fish that crowd up into these shallow lakes to spawn each spring. The name was kept when the county was organized in 1858, the same year Minnesota became a state, and buffalo fish are entirely real. They are large, deep-bodied native fish of the sucker family, and they still run in Minnesota waters every spring. The trail climbs steadily now, winding through stands of oak. In late April, the canopy is just beginning to leaf out, so light pours down onto the path. Watch the shape of the ground between the trees. It rolls constantly, pitching up and down in little ridges and bowls with no pattern to them. That randomness is the signature of a moraine. Rivers carve order into a landscape, but glaciers just leave everything where it falls. These hills sit on the eastern edge of the Great Prairie. The soils of Kandiyohi County grew up under grassland, not forest, and for thousands of years prairie fires swept through and kept most trees out. Only rugged, thick-barked bur oaks could take the heat, standing in open groves with grass beneath them. That mix of scattered oaks and open grassland is called oak savanna, once common here and now among the rarest habitats in the Midwest. Parks like Sibley are some of the last places where this Prairie Edge country survives. So who was Sibley? The park honors Henry Hastings Sibley, a fur trader who settled at Mendota in the 1830s and in 1858 became the first governor of the state of Minnesota. His name is scattered across the state, on a county, on schools and streets, and on this park in the western Lake Country. When Minnesota set aside a state park in these hills, it reached for the biggest name the young state had. The hills themselves care nothing for names. They were here 10,000 years before the state, and they will outlast every sign at the gate. Off through the trees, small ponds glitter at the bottom of steep-sided bowls. Each one marks the grave of a block of ice. Some of these kettles hold water year-round and ring with frogs in spring. Others are just marshy dimples, green with sedge. 12,000 years of settling and filling, and the glacier's fingerprints are still perfectly legible. You are never more than a few steps from the ice age on this trail. Here is how a kettle is born. As the glacier retreated, huge blocks of ice broke off, were stranded, and were buried in sand and gravel washing off the melting ice. Insulated underground, a big block could take centuries to melt away. As it slowly wasted, the ground above it collapsed into a deep, round hollow. Where the hollow dipped below the water table, a pond was born. The ponds beside this trail and countless lakes across this county began as buried, dying ice. The trail bends and begins the final climb toward Mount Tom. The grade stiffens, and the oaks thin out as the hill rises. This last pitch is the steepest walking in the park, a reminder that the moraine piles up higher here than anywhere for a long way around. In April, the air is cool and the sightlines are long, with no summer leaves to close in the view. Somewhere just above, the summit shelter is waiting. By the early 20th century, Minnesotans had begun to worry about losing places like this. Farms and pastures had claimed nearly all of the old Prairie Edge country, and public parkland was scarce in the western half of the state. In 1919, the state legislature established Sibley State Park in these hills above Lake Andrew. It arrived just as the automobile was beginning to put parks within reach of ordinary families, and the lakes and hills west of the Twin Cities suddenly felt close. A century later, the investment looks like genius. And here we are, the top of Mount Tom. A rough stone shelter crowns the summit, its granite walls pierced by wide openings that frame the country below. The elevation is modest by mountain standards, about 1,350 feet above sea level. But standing here, the number stops mattering. Everything in sight is below us, and in west-central Minnesota, that is a rare sensation indeed. Mount Tom is celebrated as one of the highest points within 50 miles in any direction. From the summit, the view rolls out over a quilt of woods, lakes, and farm fields, fading to blue at the horizon. On a clear day, you can trace the moraine itself, a band of wooded hills running away toward the northwest. Beyond it, the land flattens into open farm country. It is the whole geography of west-central Minnesota in a single look. And for generations, people have climbed this hill for exactly this view. Much of what makes this park feel finished was built by hand in the 1930s. During the Great Depression, crews of the Civilian Conservation Corps worked at Sibley between 1935 and 1938. They gathered and split granite boulders left behind by the glacier and raised buildings in the rustic style, low, sturdy structures of stone and timber meant to look as if they had grown out of the hillside. Those buildings still serve the park today. In 1992, the collection was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Take a slow turn around the summit and let the view work on you. Lake Andrew spreads below to the south, and smaller lakes wink out of the hills in every direction. In late April, the woods are just breaking into leaf, so the hills show every fold and hollow. It is easy to see why this spot became the heart of the park. Some viewpoints must be earned with a full day of climbing. This one asks only a good walk and gives back 50 miles. Time to head down. The trail drops off the summit through open oak woods, and gravity makes quick work of the elevation we earned. Descending a moraine is a different pleasure from climbing one. On the way up, you watch the ground. On the way down, you watch the country, and the lakes keep rearranging themselves through the trees, so every bend serves up a new arrangement of hill, water, and sky. The Mount Tom Trail carries a small honor. It is one of Minnesota's official hiking club trails, part of a program the state parks run to coax people onto their best paths. Members carry a little logbook, and each club trail posts a secret password somewhere along the route. Record enough passwords and you earn patches and milestones. It sounds like a game for children, and it works beautifully on adults, which is how programs like this have walked thousands of Minnesotans up this very hill. Late April is migration season, and these woods fill with travelers. The park's bird life runs from great blue herons and wood ducks on the water to scarlet tanagers and indigo buntings in the treetops. Loons and even white pelicans turn up on the larger lakes. Bluebirds work the open meadows, and ruffed grouse drum back in the thickets. A hill covered in oaks, standing between prairie and lake country, catches a little of everything with wings. The loop rolls on through a mixed country of meadow and woodlot. This stretch is easy walking, the path swinging over low rises and past marshy kettles. White-tailed deer browse these edges in the evenings, and badgers dig the drier meadow slopes. Foxes, coyotes, and woodchucks all share the same ground. Edge habitat is where wildlife concentrates, and for the walker it means the scenery never sits still. Just east of the park sits the town that serves it, New London. It was founded in 1865, when a settler named Louis Larson built a mill on the middle fork of the Crow River. The spot reminded him of New London in Wisconsin, so the name came along with him. Today it is a town of about 1,250 people, with the mill pond still at its center. For park visitors, it has long been the last stop for supplies on the way in, and the first stop for ice cream on the way out. New London also carries a wonderful piece of ghost geography. For a few years after 1866, it was a county seat, not of Candiotty County, but of a county called Monongalia that no longer exists. In 1870, the two counties merged under the Candiotty name, and Monongalia quietly vanished from the map of Minnesota. So the small town by the mill pond was once a capital, of a sort, of a county that no longer exists. Keep that in your pocket for trivia night. Back in the park, we trade the summit loop for the trails near the Interpretive Center, down close to Lake Andrew. The walking here is gentler, threading between lakeshore, marsh, and picnic grounds. The Interpretive Center holds exhibits on the glacial story and on the wildlife we have been meeting all day. It is the low country counterpart to Mount Tom. The hill explains the view, and the lakeshore explains everything living in it. Lake Andrew is the park's social heart, and it was designed to be. When the grounds were laid out, planners deliberately separated the swimming beach, the picnic areas, and the campgrounds, an early and much praised exercise in park master planning that kept the shoreline from becoming one crowded strip. Generations of west central Minnesota families learned to swim off this beach. On a warm weekend, the lakeshore still fills, while the summit trails stay quiet. A park that can absorb a Saturday crowd and still offer solitude a mile away is a well-designed park. Every old park accumulates legends, and Sibley has a good one. Park lore holds that somewhere near the beach area, a cache of memorabilia and odds and ends lies buried underground, left behind from an earlier era. It is only a rumor, and nobody has ever produced the treasure. But it says something about a place when a century of picnics, camps, and construction crews leaves behind stories of buried boxes. Keep an eye on the ground near the beach, just in case. The trail near the center winds through oaks with young grass coming in beneath them. Signs along the way retell the glacial story for anyone who skipped the climb, and name the plants doing the quiet work of holding these hills together. This is also reliable ground for wildlife, close to water, food, and cover all at once. Chipmunks and squirrels run the operation at ground level. It is an easy, generous piece of walking on which to end a hiking day. All those kettle ponds and sloughs make this hill country part of one of the continent's great duck factories. The glacial pothole wetlands of the upper Midwest and the prairie provinces produce a huge share of North America's waterfowl. Wood ducks nest in the park's hollow oaks, Canada geese patrol the lake margins, and egrets and herons stalk the shallows. Every spring and fall, the flyways overhead fill with birds connecting the Gulf Coast to the far north. A pond opened by a dying ice block 12,000 years ago is still paying dividends in wings. From above, the logic of this landscape snaps into focus. The hills roll like a rumpled green blanket and water fills every crease, exactly the chaos a melting glacier leaves behind. Mount Tom stands clear above the woods, with Lake Andrew shining at its foot. At the park boundary, you can see the farm country begin, flat and orderly, where the moraine ends. Two Minnesotas, side by side, and the seam between them runs right through this park. Sibley is a park with 4 distinct personalities. In spring, migration pours through and the woods are loud before they are even green. Summer belongs to the beach and the campground. October turns the Oak Hills bronze and rust, and the summit of Mount Tom becomes one of the finest autumn overlooks in this half of the state. In winter, the park goes quiet under snow, and the trails belong to skis and snowshoes. A century of visitors has learned there is no wrong month for these hills. Our day at Sibley State Park ends where it began, with hills that should not be here, rising out of flat farm country. A wall of ice built this place. A young state protected it in 1919, and Depression-era stonecutters gave it a face of granite. Climb Mount Tom in late April and you will have songbirds for company and 50 miles of Minnesota at your feet. Some parks impress you with sheer scale. This one wins you over with generosity. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.